Imagine this. You walk into a medieval town. Eyes follow you. Whispers. People step aside. Someone crosses themselves. You wonder, have they recognized you as a stranger? No. You just smell too good, too clean, too suspicious. In a world where the norm was the scent of sweat, smoke, old wool, and barley soup, your floral freshness raises eyebrows, not admiration. Because in the Middle Ages, a body was expected to smell like a body, not alpine morning. Subscribe to our channel if you love deep stories with a scent of history. And don't forget to comment below. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? We're genuinely curious how far this story travels. Let us imagine ourselves in a typical European town of the 13th century. Not necessarily Paris or London, just a town with a market square, narrow alleyways, a bucket in the window instead of a toilet, and where smell was not a luxury of perfumery, but a daily reality, like rain or hunger. The scent of the Middle Ages has nothing in common with what we call a fragrance today. Picture a mixture of boiled cabbage, damp sheep's wool, human sweat on the third day of fasting, wood smoke, wet boots, and something sour that defies precise identification. This is not exaggeration. It's context. In an age when most people lived in close quarters with animals, toilets were a luxury, and clothes were washed once a month, if lucky. Smell was part of human presence. People didn't smell bad. They smelled normal for their time. Interestingly, medieval people perceived smell as a form of knowledge. Something smelled rotten, possibly a sign of disease. Herbs in the air? Someone is undergoing treatment. The scent of sweat and horse? A knight, not a merchant, has arrived. Odor could reveal class, occupation, even moral standing. For instance, a tanner who processed leather carried a constant stench of ammonia due to the use of urine in his craft. That smell wasn't merely disgusting, it was professional. A person literally smelled of their work. And here's the twist. The medieval nose was far tougher than ours. People didn't faint from the stench of stables or livestock. They simply didn't register it. Sensitivity to smells is shaped by experience. If you grow up surrounded by smoke, sweat, and animals, your brain filters out what's unnecessary. The modern human, with air conditioning, deodorants, and strict standards of freshness, likely wouldn't last an hour in a medieval town without gagging. But to a person of the Middle Ages, it was just air. It simply was. And importantly, bad smells were more about morality than microbiology. Germ theory hadn't arrived yet. People didn't know bacteria caused illness, but they noticed that stench often accompanied something evil or unhealthy. Saints, according to hagiographies, were said to emit pleasant aromas even after death. Sinners, on the other hand, stank while still alive. Smell served as a marker of the soul, not just the body. This is a profound idea. A body that smells wrong might be spiritually dangerous, which is why people who smelled too clean, too floral, or too fresh could seem suspicious. After all, what kind of body doesn't smell like a body? When we hear the word hygiene, we imagine a white bathroom, a dab of lotion on the wrist, a pleasant citrusy lather. For a medieval person, hygiene, if the term even applies, meant something entirely different. And we must begin with soap. Picture a bar of medieval soap, not a silky glycerin cube with lavender scent. This was a harsh lump made from animal fat, usually pig, and ashes, with a strong, acrid odor. It was alkaline, abrasive, and if it got in your eyes, too bad. It was mostly used for laundry, not for bodies. Human skin rarely encountered soap, not because people didn't want to be clean, but because soap was expensive, risky, and, importantly, morally questionable. In early medieval Christian discourse, washing the body was approached with deep suspicion. A clean body was almost automatically a tempted body. Bathing required undressing, and bare flesh was an invitation to sin. As some monks wrote, frequent bathing weakens the spirit and excites the flesh. In certain monasteries, bathing was allowed only a few times a year, and only with the abbot's permission. This creates a paradox. Later on, especially in Italy and Islamic cities, we see lavish public bathhouses, scented waters, even rituals of purification. But there was also a strong religious tradition that viewed the body as the root of sin and cleanliness as a form of vanity. One should be clean in soul, not in skin. A class distinction emerges. Wealthy individuals could afford perfumes, essential oils, and herbs, but not for hygiene, rather to smell of status. The poor, who might splash water on themselves from a barrel, could be viewed with suspicion if they somehow appeared too fresh. Entire treatises appeared condemning excessive attention to the outer body. Washing became a moral litmus test. If you thought less about the flesh, you'd be closer to God. The more you reeked of sweat, the closer you were to the earth, to humility, to truth. And there was another factor, fear of water. In many parts of Europe, people believed that bathing opened the pores and thus exposed the body to disease. Instead of washing, they recommended rubbing with dry cloths, fumigating with smoke, or applying oils, or even wine. So when we ask, why didn't medieval people bathe? The better question is, they did, just not how we'd expect, and not for the reasons we'd understand. Washing wasn't about comfort, it was about risk. Not about health, but spiritual resilience. Not about fragrance, but about character. A medieval public bathhouse wasn't just a building with hot water, it was a cultural phenomenon, a place where bodily cleanliness met moral anxiety, where washing became a social, erotic, and even political act. In the cities of the 12th to 14th centuries, bathhouses were widespread. They were built throughout Europe, from Paris to Prague, from Cologne to Krakow. Sometimes there was one in every neighborhood, like coffee shops today, and they weren't reserved for the rich. Even the poor had access to simple steam rooms where they could wash off fatigue and stink, at least for a while. A bathhouse typically included several rooms, a changing area, a steam room, a tub or wooden vat filled with hot water, and occasionally a room for rest, massage, or intimate services. And this is where the moral story takes a complicated turn. Because bathhouses quickly became more than places of hygiene, they turned into spaces of sensual indulgence, not due to exceptional depravity, but as a byproduct of the setting. Nudity, warmth, physical closeness. Men and women in many towns could bathe together, not always nude, not always scandalously, but enough to make the church uneasy. Starting in the 13th century, sermons began condemning bathhouses as sources of lust. City records mention cases of bathhouses being shut down for immoral behavior among guests. In later centuries, especially with the rise of the Reformation and fear of epidemics, many were closed down altogether, citing not only sin, but also public health concerns. Yet in the beginning, bathing was also considered a medical treatment. Physicians, yes, there were physicians in the Middle Ages, recommended steam sessions to purge the body of excess bile or phlegm. Aromatic herbs were added to water to balance the humors. So people visited bathhouses not just for pleasure, but for health. And at the same time, the bathhouse became a space of social equality. You might find a merchant, a craftsman, and a soldier all sharing the same steam. In the bathhouse, there were no clothes, and therefore no class markers. This unnerved those invested in status and hierarchy. Here lies another paradox. In a culture where the body was seen as a source of sin, the bathhouse revealed the body, and yet allowed it to be purified. And while, in theory, bathing was virtuous and indulgent sinful, the line between the two became dangerously thin. So when we say today, let's go to the spa or relax in the sauna, we're unaware that to a medieval mind, this could seem like flirting with spiritual disaster. Hot water wasn't just comfort. It was a challenge for the soul. When we picture a medieval king, we imagine velvet robes, a golden crown, a sword, a throne, and, naturally, the aroma of nobility. Perfume, rosewater, refinement. But strip away the romance, and the truth is far less fragrant. In fact, medieval monarchs often smelled worse than their subjects. A king didn't frequent public bathhouses. His body was sacred, untouchable. But that didn't mean he bathed regularly. Even monthly bathing wasn't standard. Philip II of Spain reportedly bathed only a handful of times in his life. Louis XIV, the Sun King, believed water was harmful to health and instead relied on perfumes in industrial quantities. Court records show that while some castles had private bathing rooms, they were rarely used. More commonly, the royal body was wiped down with scented cloths, the hair dusted with powder, and the skin dabbed with lavender, rosemary, ambergris, or musk. But these didn't remove odor. They simply layered over it. The resulting mix of sweat, scented fat, and animal-based perfume created what was considered a noble aroma. In truth, it was a complex stench wrapped in gold. Royal garments were not laundered as we understand the term. Lavish clothing made of silk, velvet, or fur couldn't be soaked. Instead, it was treated with herbs, smoked, or aired out. Undergarments were changed more often, but not daily. Sweat accumulated. Clothes absorbed and retained the owner's scent. These smells weren't a sign of neglect. They were part of ritual and identity. If a peasant smelled of sweat and soil, the aristocrat smelled of sweat and rosemary. The key word in both cases, sweat. Royal life was also sedentary. Heavy fabrics, corsets, layers of garments, and a lack of bathing created a microclimate under the clothes, one that didn't favor freshness. And royal receptions? Hundreds packed into a hall, wrapped in thick garments, without ventilation. Fresh air was replaced with incense. Lavender sachets were sometimes hung, or the space fumigated with resin smoke. Then there were the illnesses: scurvy, syphilis, rotting teeth, infected wounds, all of which emitted odors that not even the strongest perfume could mask. The royal stink wasn't metaphorical. It was part of daily life. So if you imagine the court of Louis XIV as a place of lace, refinement, and lofty ideals, don't forget to add suffocating heat, animal musk, chamber pot fumes, and the heavy aromas that aimed more to conceal than to charm. This was an era when scent was not separate from power, it accompanied it. It spoke of it, and it kept people at a distance, not only symbolically, but quite literally. A medieval monastery was not a place of silence and lavender. It was a world of dim corridors, cold stone floors, candle and oil lamp smoke, the scent of mold, damp wood, pickled vegetables, and people who lived without showers, but with constant prayer. Monks, especially those in strict orders, did not bathe regularly. Asceticism meant more than avoiding fleshly pleasures. It meant distancing oneself from the body altogether. The scent of the body was part of the body, and the body was the source of sin. Therefore, holiness wasn't defined by clean skin, but by indifference to how the body smelled. In the rules of Benedictines, Cistercians, and Carthusians, limited washing was often explicitly stated. In 13th century French monasteries, for example, monks were allowed to bathe only twice a year, once before Easter and once before Christmas. And even then, not always a full bath. Sometimes just washing the feet. Washing clothes was even rarer. A monk might wear the same tunic for months. Their scent, a mixture of sweat, sheep's wool, old oil, and thyme, was not a sign of negligence, but a symbol of devotion. The farther one was from the physical, the closer to the divine. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of smell wasn't among the living, but the dead. According to medieval hagiographies, saints often smelled sweet even after death. This was known as the odor of sanctity, a holy fragrance. A person who lived righteously might emit the scent of roses, incense, honey, or something indescribably pleasant after death. If a body rotted and stank, it cast doubt on their sanctity. There are dozens of recorded cases where, during exhumations of relics, witnesses described sweet fragrances, unexpected freshness, or scents that filled the monastery. These were seen as signs of divine favor, sometimes even used as evidence in canonization proceedings. In the context of the time, it made sense. A saint's body was believed to resist decay, and therefore to resist stench. Scent became an indicator of incorruptibility. These ideas had roots in antiquity, but the Middle Ages turned them into doctrine. There was also a demonic aspect. In popular belief, the devil smelled of sulfur, and evil spirits brought foul odors. Pleasant smells, then, served as spiritual protection. Churches used incense, aromatic herbs, and fragrances not just for beauty, but as weapons of faith. So, in medieval Christianity, the body could stink in a literal sense, but the soul was expected to smell. And that wasn't a metaphor. In a world where scent signified the presence or absence of divine grace, the nose was a theological instrument. In a world without advertising, social media, or logos to instantly declare one's class, scent became part of the visual identity, or rather, part of a social aroma that told others more about you than words ever could. Fragrance wasn't just a luxury, it was a signal. In wealthy households, people used not only perfumes, but also special scents for clothing, bedding, and hair. Garments were stuffed with herbs, lavender, mint, thyme, rosemary. These weren't just pleasant, they were believed to protect against plague, bad air, and evil spirits. In an age lacking medical certainty, scent was part of prevention. People wore aromatic pouches or pomanders, small silver or wooden spheres filled with herb and resin mixtures. These were held to the nose while walking through towns, especially during epidemics, and were sometimes exchanged as gifts. Perfume itself certainly existed and evolved. It was made from oils, flowers, and animal substances like musk or ambergris. Alcohol had not yet become the main base, but the scents already carried depth and complexity. Many recipes arrived in Europe from the Arab world, via trade, the Crusades, and Muslim Spain. And with them came not only technique, but a culture of scent. An important nuance: a fragrance didn't have to be pleasant. It had to be prestigious. Take ambergris, for instance, a substance formed in a sperm whale's digestive tract. Not exactly charming to modern noses, but in the Middle Ages, it reeked of luxury, rare, costly, and exotic. Much like today, some scents are not delicious, but unmistakably say, "I can afford this." Scent was also a tool of seduction and power. Women anointed themselves with oils to allure. Men wore them to project strength. At courtly gatherings, scent created aura. Whoever smelled the most distinct stood out immediately. In some cases, it was quite literally a way to assert presence. Medieval texts often describe characters not by their clothes, but by their scent. A smell that was too plain or absent altogether was a sign of poverty, decline, or suspicious humility. In this way, scent wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about identity, class, danger, or desirability. It was a code. And in a world where most people couldn't read or write, the nose became a social sense. One of the most persistent stereotypes about the Middle Ages goes like this: everyone was dirty. Supposedly, an entire millennium without soap, baths, or toilets, an era of stench, lice, and mass aversion to water. But is that actually true? In fact, the idea of a filthy Europe is not medieval at all. It's a modern invention. It gained traction during the Enlightenment, and especially in the 19th century, when anything rational, sanitary, and scientific was in vogue. The past was painted as barbaric to make the present look enlightened. The French mocked the medieval Germans. The English mocked the French. The bourgeoisie mocked the peasants. And all of it often through the lens of smell. Thus emerged the caricature of the medieval person, a stinking religious fanatic, afraid of water, kissing the bones of saints. But archaeology, textual studies, and plain logic tell a different story. First, medieval cities had bathhouses. These are mentioned in documents, chronicles, and letters. They were built according to regulations, maintained, and even taxed. In some regions, bathing once a week was standard. Not for everyone, not always, but regular hygiene did exist. Second, we have recipes for soap, perfumes, and medical advice on hygiene. Monastic texts prescribe designated days for bathing. Household records show purchases of soap, oils, and towels. This doesn't look like a world of indifferent rot. Third, context matters. True, there were no flush toilets. Yes, it would seem dirty by our standards, but those were different standards. People adapted. Even peasants bathed in rivers, owned spare clothing, combed their hair, and used ashes, clay, or herbs. Hygiene was different, but it existed. So where did the myth come from? In the 19th century, it served as a convenient ideological tool. Cleanliness was framed as modern, intelligent, and civilized. Dirtiness, primitive and backward. And since the past was imagined as dirty, The best way to showcase progress was to proclaim, "We're not like them anymore." Ironically, many 19th century doctors still refused to wash their hands before surgery. So the era that invented the filthy Middle Ages myth hadn't quite figured out hygiene itself. Let's put it this way. The Middle Ages weren't dirty. They were different. That difference had its own logic, rituals, and worldview. And before mocking people who bathed once a month, perhaps we should ask how many of us shower daily, but never disconnect from our phones. Modern cities smell like rain on asphalt, bakery coffee, gasoline, and air conditioning. A medieval city, on the other hand, smelled like a barrel into which everything was thrown. People, animals, food, waste, smoke, rural life, fear of death, and religious devotion, and then the lid was sealed shut. The smells of a medieval town were a living chronicle. There was no sewage system, only ditches or open trenches where everything was poured. Urine, slop, animal blood from butcher stalls, kitchen waste. This mixture flowed along the streets, especially during rain. If lucky, the trench led to a river. If not, to the town square. People lived stacked on top of each other. Upper floors of homes jutted over the streets. Windows served for ventilation and the dumping of chamber pots. And yes, there was a customary shout to warn pedestrians below. If you didn't jump away in time, well, that was on you. Markets were another olfactory battlefield. Fresh meat, fish, eggs, bread, vegetables, all sold outdoors without refrigeration. The smell of rotting fish, mixed with herbs and mulled wine, created a bouquet that would send today's gourmets running. Add animals. Cities were full of livestock. Cows, goats, pigs, chickens. They lived next to homes. They were sold on the street. And they, too, left traces. Manure was everywhere, especially in wet weather. Then there were the artisans, dyers, tanners, blacksmiths, potters, all with open workshops, producing smoke, acid fumes, lye, burning leather, a true symphony of laboring odors. And of course, people. Sweat, wool, unwashed skin, rare laundry. Perfume was a luxury. The scent of the medieval crowd wasn't a metaphor. It was a sensory experience that modern noses would struggle to endure. Despite this, attempts at regulation existed. Some cities had night soil men to remove waste. Paris and London introduced street maintenance rules, even fines. But the system was weak. Most importantly, the idea of hygiene as a right simply didn't exist. Cleanliness wasn't the norm. It was an exception. You could say a medieval city didn't smell of dirt, but of life in full spectrum. Everything was close together: birth, death, disease, dinner, prayer, rain, urine, beef. It was a world without insulation, without zoning, without ventilation. And in that chaotic blend of smells, there was a kind of logic, a kind of ecology, even a kind of aesthetic. Because those who were born in it didn't find it unbearable. They simply lived in it. In the Middle Ages, a woman's body wasn't just a body. It was a symbol, a marker of morality, honor, lineage, and chastity. That's why a woman's scent could be more than a description. It could be an accusation. Chronicles and legal records from the era include references to smelly women, not as casual insults, but as coded suspicions of sin, disease, or even witchcraft. Smell off? You might be sick, or sinful, or both. Either way, suspicious. Special attention was given to intimate hygiene. In medical texts of the time, women were described as naturally moist, vulnerable to external influences, with bodies that emit vapors. So a woman's scent wasn't just biological, it was an indicator of her inner state, both moral and physical. Midwifery guides often included recipes for deodorizing washes, herbal infusions, vinegar rinses, petal solutions, bark extracts. Not for pleasure, but to avoid appearing too bodily. In towns, women could be shamed or even punished for uncleanness without hard evidence. Prostitutes were required to wear specific clothing, not just as a visual marker, but because their scent was supposedly unhideable. Rural women who smelled bad could be accused of spoiling milk or causing illness. Even among nuns, scent was sometimes a source of spiritual concern, and yet it was women who preserved the knowledge of hygiene. They made soap, collected herbs, knew how to wash children, care for the elderly, treat skin. There were home recipes for cleansing, washing, steam treatments, but they were passed down orally and often dismissed as women's magic. Societal control over the female body included not just behavior, but smell. A woman was expected to smell modest, subtle, fresh. Any deviation could be used against her. In that sense, scent became an extension of patriarchal power, an invisible whip. And while women built the cultures of scent, care, and healing, they were also judged, sometimes harshly, for exactly how they smelled. In the 14th century, the Black Death swept through Europe, claiming the lives of up to 60% of the population in some regions. Streets emptied, cities fell silent, families vanished. But what remained was scent. And it became not just a companion to the epidemic, but a weapon against it. Medieval medicine didn't know bacteria, but it knew the theory of miasma, the belief that disease was spread by bad air, and bad air was understood as anything that smelled foul. Therefore, the logic of protection became simple. Eliminate or overpower the stench, and you might survive. This gave rise to aromatic defenses. The most famous was Four Thieves vinegar, a concoction of vinegar infused with herbs, rubbed on the body to ward off infection. Another tool, the pomander, a silver or wooden sphere filled with spices, herbs, and resins, worn on a chain or held under the nose, especially in crowds. There was also fumigation, burning herbs, incense, even sandalwood or sage, to cleanse the air. This was the age of the infamous plague doctor masks, long-nosed, beak-like masks stuffed with aromatic mixtures. These outfits, now resembling horror costumes, were considered cutting-edge protection. If the air was dangerous, the nose had to be filtered through scent. Perfumes shifted in function. No longer just tools of seduction, they became instruments of survival. Alcohol-based solutions were sprayed on rooms, clothes, even letters. People carried scented cloths to hold near their faces. Some cities even passed laws mandating the fumigation of houses where illness was present. But scent also became a signal of dread. If something smelled off, it could mean sickness nearby. Decomposing bodies were detected by nose before eye. The smell of death often arrived before church bells rang. People grew afraid not only of pain, but of the scent of catastrophe. This was a time when scent, once an aesthetic detail, became a survival sense. Smell was the early warning, the defense, the hope. People sniffed their surroundings, their clothing, even each other, trying to gauge the danger. It didn't save them from the plague, but it gave them the illusion of control. In an era where medicine was powerless, scent became the only hope you could touch. If you couldn't defeat death, at least try not to inhale it. Everything changes. Even smells have a history. Somewhere between the 16th and 19th centuries, a slow but radical transformation occurred. The world where scent was normal began to dream of a world without scent at all. There were many reasons. First, the scientific revolution. In the 17th century, medicine changed. Anatomical studies, microscopes, and early theories of microbes emerged. The miasma theory still held sway, but a new idea took root. Maybe scent was a symptom, not the cause of illness. Second, cities. They grew, became denser, industrialized. Stench wasn't just background anymore, it became a political problem. Authorities began passing sanitary laws. Sewers were built. Public toilets appeared. Street cleaning services were created. At the same time, the fashion around scent changed. Where scent once meant status, now status meant the absence of scent. Cleanliness became the new sign of respectability, especially in the bourgeois culture of the 19th century. Linens, soap, disinfectants, the sterile woman ideal. French, British, and German doctors began vigorously promoting hand washing, personal hygiene, and kitchen sanitation. A new narrative was born: the clean are the progressive, which meant that dirt was no longer just poverty. It was a moral flaw. Perfumes shifted direction. Musk was out. Light citrus notes came in. Complex layers gave way to freshness. Cologne was invented. Unisex fragrances, soap that smelled like nothing. Sterility became an ideal. Hospitals were painted white. Homes were scrubbed with disinfectant. Advertisements proclaimed, your body shouldn't just be clean, it should smell like nothing at all. And here lies a paradox. For thousands of years, humanity lived in a world of smells, where scent was part of one's perception of the social, moral, and medical world. Suddenly, smell became indecent. Sweat became shameful. Scent became excessive. The ideal body, one that has no smell. This shift was cultural tectonics. Where the medieval person lived in a world of living scent, the modern person strives for a vacuum, for emptiness, for neutrality. But in doing so, are we not losing something essential? The modern human is a creature terrified of its own smell. We shower daily, often twice. We use deodorants, antiperspirants, antiseptics, scented wipes, gels, shampoos, conditioners, mouthwash, shoe sprays, hand sanitizers. Our bodies have become battlegrounds against odor. But where does this obsession with freshness come from? Part of it is historical inertia. Bourgeois hygiene ideals of the 19th century, 20th century advertising, and a lingering fear that dirt equals poverty or disease. But another part is consumer culture, which has packaged freshness into a product. What does the smell of freshness even mean? It's not eucalyptus or lemon. It's an abstraction. In ads, it's a white shirt, a green leaf, an Arctic breeze, floating bubbles. It's an ideological scent, not a botanical one. Fresh has no scent in nature, but it does in the engineered world of marketing. The paradox: we strive to smell like nothing, but that nothing is expensive, scientifically formulated, and carefully branded. It's a learned, imposed neutrality that masks the body, emotions, even mood. At the same time, there's a rising trend of hyper-individualized scent. People now seek their scent, a signature fragrance, a niche perfume. We see notes of resin, earth, smoke, skin, but always within control, smelling authentic, without the risk of being too real. This means we live in tension. On one side, the desire for sterile scentlessness. On the other, a craving for something alive, real. We want to smell like ourselves without actually being ourselves. We long for embodiment, so long as it's sanitized. That's why scent has become the psychological map of our era. We're not just battling odor, we're battling the body, nature, vulnerability. We want to be clean, not just of dirt, but of the scent of experience, memory, time. But scent is memory. Scent is life. And perhaps what we fear most isn't the stink, it's the possibility that someone might truly sense us. Let's imagine time travel is real. You step into the machine right after a shower, wearing deodorant, maybe a drop of perfume behind your ear. Clean freshness with notes of bergamot and amber. You press the button and land in the year 1348 in a European medieval town. What happens next? First, you're instantly outed without saying a word. You don't look like them, don't walk like them, don't breathe like them. But worst of all, you smell like something entirely alien, not just different, but alarmingly different. People around you grow uneasy. To the medieval nose, your scent is too clean, too chemical, too disembodied. It's as if, in today's subway, someone sat next to you smelling like gasoline, roses, and brand new plastic all at once. You'd be suspicious, too. In a crowd, you attract curiosity or fear. Merchants might refuse to serve you. Children hide behind mothers. Women cross themselves. Men might ask where you're from and why you smell like an angel or a poison. If you're not mistaken for a sorcerer, then perhaps a noble. But even that's dangerous because not even kings smelled like this. Your scent lacks context. It carries no sweat, no earth, no smoke, no kitchen, no horses, which means it's not human. It's a signal that says, not of this world. Medieval society was hypersensitive to otherness. And otherness wasn't just about speech or dress. Scent was a marker of class, gender, morality, health. If you smelled like no one else, you were outside the system, and that meant potentially dangerous. What would they do to you? Not necessarily something violent. You might be invited to a monastery, or examined by a physician, or questioned, or simply avoided. In any case, your scent would be your first betrayal in time. Bodily freshness without a trace of scent would be suspicious, like a voice with no sound, a smile with no muscles. A person without a smell isn't a person, it's a phantom. And in a world where scent defines reality, that's the most dangerous signal of all. Of all the senses, smell is the least controlled, the most emotional, the most intimate. You can close your eyes, cover your ears, avoid touch. But breathing is almost always involuntary. In the Middle Ages, people knew this intuitively, physically. Scent was part of identity, who you were, where you came from, whether you were healthy or sinful, saintly or simply worked yesterday in a tannery. Scent didn't need words. It spoke on its own. It was a social password, a biological signature, a spiritual indicator. Imagine a life without deodorant, without perfume, without air conditioning or sealed walls, a life where you cannot hide, where your scent is you. No filter, no freshness from a commercial. And strangely enough, that's terrifying, but also liberating, because a world where scent is part of truth forces you to be closer to life, closer to others, sometimes closer to death, but also to love, to bread, to soil, to the smoke of evening fires. Modern humans have mastered self-control to the point of sterility. We invented the smell of nothing. But within that nothing, there's loneliness. In an odorless world, we stop recognizing each other. We stop being bodies. We become only images. Scent is the body's last postcard. From a time when people smelled not like brands, but like themselves. From an age where everything was nearer, heavier, fuller, where saints could smell like roses and peasants like soil, and both carried the scent of the real. Perhaps that's why we wouldn't last a day in the Middle Ages, not because of the lack of soap, but because of the presence of something too real, too strong, too honest, too close. And that, perhaps, is the greatest distance between us and them.